Welcome to What If Sleepstorian, where the boundaries between worlds dissolve and beloved characters step beyond the pages of their original tales. Here, in the hushed hours between day and night, a relentless hunter of darkness might cross paths with a man torn by his own creations, their worlds colliding in a city veiled in fog and secrets, where the impossible becomes beautifully inevitable. Each story begins with a simple question, what if, and unfolds into a gentle tapestry of intrigue, wonder and dreams. Tonight, we begin with something a little grim, a tale woven from the shadows of gaslit streets and the cold gleam of laboratory vials, where the line between man and monster blurs and the truth hides in the flicker of a candle's flame. If these stories bring you comfort or spark your imagination, I'd be grateful if you'd like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. Let me know where in the world you're listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. So dim the lights, find your most comfortable position, and let these whispered narratives carry you softly towards sleep. Imagine, if you will, London in 1893, a city poised on the edge of a century's end, its pulse quickened by progress yet shadowed by dread. This isn't the London of polished carriages and grand balls, though those glitter in their own guarded corners. No, this is a city of contrasts, where the glow of gas lamps battles a fog so thick it seems to breathe, curling around your ankles like a living thing. The air carries a sharp bite, the acrid sting of coal smoke, the damp musk of wet wool, the faint sweetness of spilled ale from a tavern's open door. You can hear the city's restless heart, the clatter of hooves on cobblestones, the distant wail of a factory whistle, the soft hum of voices bartering in the chill of a street market. Touch the world here, and your fingers graze the cold, slick brick of an alley wall, the worn leather of a hansom cab seat, the fragile edge of a newspaper smudged with ink and rain. Taste the air, and it's bitter with soot, laced with the faint salt of sweat from those who toil in the city's underbelly, their dreams as fleeting as the mist. This was a time when survival was a daily wager. For every gentleman in a tailored coat, there were dozens scraping by in cramped tenements, their hands calloused from labour, their lungs heavy with the city's breath. The papers boasted of scientific marvels, electric lights, new medicines, but the truth was grimmer. Children worked in factories, their fingers raw from machinery. Women stitched seams in dim garrets, their eyes strained by candlelight. Can you imagine the weight of that air? Thick with coal dust and desperation, settling on your tongue like a promise unkept. This was a world where hope flickered like a guttering flame, where every step forward was shadowed by the past. In the heart of Whitechapel, where shadows clung to every corner, a series of brutal attacks stirred whispers of something unnatural. The victims were found in alleys, their bodies pale, their throats torn as if by a beast, yet the wounds bore a precision that spoke of intent. The press, ever eager for sensation, called it the work of a demon of the night, their headlines screaming of blood and terror. But to one man, a stranger in this city of fog, the marks were more than savage. They were familiar, a signature he had hunted across continents. He was a figure of quiet resolve, his coat heavy with the dust of distant roads, his eyes sharp with a faith that burned brighter than the gas lamps. Another man, a scientist cloaked in the respectability of his profession, saw the same wounds and felt a chill of recognition, not of the supernatural, but of something born in his own laboratory, a shadow he could not escape. The hunter arrived in London under a moonless sky, his boots sinking into the muck of a Whitechapel street. The air was sour with the stench of refuse and the faint copper of blood, the cobblestones slick underfoot. He carried a satchel, its leather worn, its contents clinking softly, tools of his trade, forged in faith and tempered by necessity. His name was Abraham Van Helsing, a man whose life was a crusade against the darkness, his heart guided by a belief in forces beyond the mortal eye. The scientist, meanwhile, worked in a laboratory in Bloomsbury, its air sharp with the tang of chemicals and the hum of gas burners. His name was Henry Jekyll, a doctor whose hands crafted remedies but whose mind wrestled with a secret that threatened to consume him. Their paths would cross in this city of secrets, drawn together by a question. What if the monster they hunted was not born of hell, but of science? Picture yourself standing in a Whitechapel alley, the fog curling around you like a lover's whisper, the distant sound of a violin drifting from a tenement window. Your fingers brush the damp brick, its chill seeping into your skin, and the air tastes of ash and fear. This is where our story begins, not with a cry, but with a shadow. A figure moving through the mist, its footsteps heavy, its presence a wound in the night. The hunter followed the trail, his eyes catching details others missed. A smear of blood on a wall, its edges too clean for a beast's work. A torn scrap of cloth, coarse and stained, caught on a jagged nail. The scientist in his laboratory studied a vial of blood under a microscope, its cells dancing in patterns that defied his reason, their strangeness a mirror to the chaos within him. The attacks had begun weeks ago, each one a brushstroke in a portrait of terror. A barmaid, found lifeless behind a tavern, her eyes wide with shock, her throat marked by wounds that seemed to pulse with intent. A dock worker slumped in a doorway, his hands still clutching a bottle, his blood drained to a whisper. The whispers grew louder, the city's pulse quickening with fear. Van Helsing moved through the streets, his steps deliberate, his mind a fortress of logic and faith. He visited the scenes, kneeling in the muck, his fingers tracing the wounds, his heart whispering prayers for the lost. The marks were not those of a vampire, not quite. The precision was too human, the savagery too controlled. Yet the signs were there. The pallor of the victims, the absence of struggle, the faint scent of something unnatural, like earth and iron mingled with decay. Jekyll, in his laboratory, wrestled with a different truth. His hands, steady as they measured powders and stirred solutions, trembled when he read the papers. The descriptions of the attack stirred a memory he could not silence. A shadow that moved within him, a presence he had birthed in a moment of hubris. His laboratory was a sanctuary, its walls lined with books, its air heavy with the scent of carbolic acid and wax. But it was also a prison, its mirrors reflecting a face he no longer trusted. He had created something, a formula meant to free the soul, but it had unleashed a monster instead. Edward Hyde, a name whispered only in his darkest thoughts, was no longer just a shadow. He was a force, a creature of rage and cunning, his footsteps echoing in the city's alleys. Can you feel it? The chill of a Whitechapel street, the fog's damp kiss on your skin, the distant cry of a night watchman cutting through the silence. What would it be like to stand in that laboratory, the air sharp with chemicals, the mirror showing a face you fear? The hunter and the scientist were strangers to each other, yet bound by the same question, their paths converging in a city that thrived on secrets. Van Helsing's faith was a beacon, guiding him through the darkness. Jekyll's science was a chain, binding him to a truth he could not escape. They would meet, not as allies, but as men driven by need, one to hunt a monster, the other to redeem a soul. The hunter's journey led him to a tavern in Spitalfields, its air thick with the stench of stale beer and unwashed bodies, the hum of voices, a low, restless drone. The floor was sticky underfoot, the table scarred by years of careless hands. He sat in a corner, his coat blending with the shadows, his eyes scanning the crowd. A barmaid spoke of a man who came at night, his face hidden, his hands rough and quick. She remembered his laugh, low and guttural, and the way his eyes gleamed in the lamplight like a beast's. Van Helsing listened, his fingers tracing the edge of a silver cross in his pocket, its weight a reminder of his purpose. The man she described was no vampire, but something worse, a creature of intent, its savagery cloaked in human form. Jekyll, meanwhile, stood in his laboratory, the air cool with the scent of glass and metal, the soft clink of vials a rhythm to his thoughts. He studied a journal, its pages filled with notes in his own hand. their words a confession of ambition gone astray. He had sought to separate the good from the evil within a man, to free the soul from its darker urges. But the formula had been a key, not to salvation, but to chaos. Hyde was his creation, a shadow given flesh, his strength a mockery of Jekyll's restraint. The attacks in Whitechapel were not his doing, not directly, but they bore his mark. The same rage, the same hunger. Jekyll's fingers brushed the mirror, its surface cold, its reflection a stranger's face. He whispered a name, not his own, and the sound was a wound. The city watched, its fog curling like a shroud around their shoulders. The streets of Whitechapel were a stark contrast to Bloomsbury's polished facades, their air sour with sweet and despair, their cobblestones slick with the city's refuse. Men and women huddled in doorways, their eyes hollow, their hands clutching coins or bottles. The hunter followed a lead to a pawn shop, its windows grimy, its shelves cluttered with the remnants of broken lives. A tarnished locket, a faded coat, a knife with a worn handle. The pawnbroker spoke of a man who had pawned a ring, its band etched with a strange symbol, his hands trembling as he counted the coins. Van Helsing's eyes narrowed, the symbol familiar, not from scripture but from the occult, a mark tied to blood and shadow. Jekyll's steps led him to a hospital in Soho, its air sharp with the smell of carbolic and sickness, the moans of patients a low, constant hum. He volunteered there, his hands steady as he bandaged wounds, but his mind was elsewhere, tracing the attacks, their pattern a mirror to his own fears. A nurse spoke of a patient who had survived an attack, his ramblings wild but telling. A man with eyes like fire, his strength unnatural, his laugh a sound that lingered in nightmares. Jekyll listened, his heart heavy, his mind turning over the possibility that Hyde was not just his shadow, but something more, a force that fed on the city's darkness, a monster that could not be contained. What would you have done in a world like this? Would you have followed the hunter's path, your fingers tracing a symbol in the dark, your faith a shield against fear? Or would you have stood in that laboratory, the mirror's cold truth staring back, your science a chain you could not break? The city held its breath, its fog a curtain hiding truths too heavy to bear. The hunter and the scientist were on a collision course, their steps echoing through a city that never slept, their minds racing toward a truth that would test their souls. The tavern's dim light flickered as Van Helsing leaned closer to the barmaid, her voice a whisper now, her eyes darting to the door. She spoke of a man who had lingered in the shadows, his coat patched, his hands stained with something dark, not blood, but oil, its scent sharp and metallic. Van Helsing's mind turned, the oil a clue, a thread leading to the docks where the air was thick with tar and salt, the ground slick with the city's refuse. He thanked her, his voice low, his hand leaving a coin that gleamed in the lamplight. The night was young, and the hunt was far from over. Jekyll in his laboratory closed his journal, its pages heavy with truths he could not voice. The air was cool now, the gas burners silent, their flames extinguished. He stood by the window, the fog pressing against the glass, its chill a reminder of the city beyond. His fingers traced the vial that held his formula, its liquid a deep, unnatural green, its glow a promise of power and peril. He had created Hyde, but the attacks were not his alone. They were a mirror, a reflection of a city that bred monsters in its shadows. The scientist's heart ached, his mind torn between redemption and despair, his soul a battlefield where faith and science clashed. The city exhaled, its fog curling through the streets like a silent vow, its lights flickering like stars in a clouded sky. The hunter and the scientist moved through its veins, their paths converging, their purposes entwined. The truth was out there, in the shadows of Whitechapel, in the gleam of a laboratory vial, in the heart of a city that whispered of monsters and men. Their story was just beginning, a tapestry of faith and fear, of science and shadow, woven in the quiet of the night, where dreams and truths waited to be found. The city stirred as the night deepened, its breath a damp mist that clung to London's bones, softening the edges of a world sharp with secrets. The streets of 1893 were a labyrinth, their cobblestones worn smooth by countless boots, each step a story untold. The air carried a new weight now, the sharp tang of coal fires rekindled, the faint sweetness of roasted chestnuts from a vendor's cart, their warmth and fleeting comfort in the chill. The sounds were softer, more intimate, the creak of a shutter in the breeze, the distant laughter from a hidden courtyard, the gentle lap of the Thames against its banks. To touch the city was to feel its contradictions, the smooth polish of a brass doorknob in Bloomsbury, the gritty damp of a Whitechapel wall, the fragile newsprint of a headline fluttering in an alley. The taste of the air was heavy, a blend of soot and longing, as if the city exhaled the dreams of those who walked its shadows. Van Helsing moved through this restless night, his coat heavy with the damp, his steps silent but purposeful. The docks were a world apart from the city's heart, their air thick with the stench of fish and tar, the ground slick with oil that gleamed under the gas lamps. He followed the trail of the oil-stained cloth, its scent a beacon in the fog. The docks were alive with the hum of labour, the creak of ropes, the shouts of men unloading crates, the clatter of barrels rolling across wooden planks. His fingers brushed the rough wood of a crate, its surface splintered, its edges damp with river mist. He knelt in the shadows, his eyes catching a glint of metal. A knife, its blade dulled, but its handle worn, its surface marked with the same oil he had smelled in the tavern. The symbol from the pawnshop ring was etched into its hilt, a mark of something ancient, something unholy. Jekyll, in his laboratory, stood before a microscope, its lens revealing a world of secrets in a drop of blood. The air was sharp with the scent of chemicals, the soft hiss of a gas burner, a rhythm to his thoughts. His hands, steady as they adjusted the lens, trembled when he thought of Hyde. The blood was from a victim, its cells strange, their patterns echoing the chaos of his formula. He saw Hyde in his mind's eye, not the man he had been, but the creature he had become, his strength a mockery of Jekyll's control, his rage a mirror to the city's darkness. The laboratory's mirrors reflected his face, pale and drawn, the eyes of a man who had seen too much. He whispered a prayer, not to God, but to science, a plea for answers that would not come. The hunter's path led him to a warehouse, its air heavy with the smell of damp wood and rusted iron, its shadows deep and unyielding. The floor creaked underfoot, the sound swallowed by the distant roar of the river. He found a crate, its lid pried open, its contents a tangle of papers, receipts, a map, a photograph of a woman, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. The photograph was old, its edges frayed, but the woman's features were unmistakable. Not a victim, but someone connected to the attacks, someone who had seen the shadow before it struck. Van Helsing's fingers lingered on the image, his mind turning over the symbol, the oil, the knife. The attacks were not random. They were a ritual, a pattern woven by a mind that was both human and monstrous. Jekyll's steps took him to the hospital again, its air thick with the scent of antiseptic and despair, the moans of patients a low, constant hum. He spoke to the survivor, a young man whose eyes were hollow, his voice a whisper of terror. The man spoke of a figure in the fog, its movements swift, its strength unnatural. He described the eyes, not human, but burning, like embers in the dark. Jekyll listened, his heart heavy, his mind racing. The description matched Hyde, but there was something else, something older, something that spoke of blood and shadow. He returned to his laboratory, the air cool now, the mirrors reflecting a truth he could not deny. Hyde was his creation, but the attacks were more than his doing. They were a bridge between science and the supernatural, a line he had crossed without knowing. Can you imagine standing in that warehouse, the air heavy with the scent of decay, the photographer's weight a question in your hands? Or picture yourself in that laboratory, the mirrors reflecting a face you fear, the blood secrets dancing under the lens. What would you have felt knowing the truth was so close, yet so steeped in shadow? The hunter and the scientist moved through the city, their paths converging, their purposes entwined. Van Helsing's faith was a fire burning through the fog. Jekyll's science was a chain, binding him to a truth he could not escape. The city watched, its streets a labyrinth of secrets, its fog a veil that hid the monster they sought. The warehouse was a tomb, its silence broken only by the drip of water from a rusted pipe. Van Helsing stood among the crates, his fingers tracing the symbol on the knife, his mind turning over the photograph. The woman was no stranger. Her face appeared in his notes, a name whispered in the occult circles he had studied. A woman tied to a cult, its rituals steeped in blood, its purpose a defiance of life itself. The attacks were not just murders, they were offerings, a ritual to summon something darker, something that fed on the city's despair. His heart quickened, his faith a shield against the fear that crept into his bones. He slipped the photograph into his satchel, its weight a promise to find the truth, to hunt the shadow before it struck again. Jekyll, in his laboratory, poured the green liquid into a vial, its glow a mockery of his hopes. The air was heavy now, the mirrors reflecting a man who was both creator and prisoner. He had birthed Hyde, but the creature had grown beyond his control, its rage a mirror to the city's own. The attacks were not just Hyde's doing, they were a pattern, a ritual that echoed the scientist's own fears. He saw the symbol in his mind, not from his studies, but from a memory. A book, its pages forbidden, its words a warning of forces that science could not contain. His hands trembled as he closed the vial, his mind racing toward a truth he could not face. Hyde was not just a monster, but a key, a bridge to something older, something that waited in the shadows. The city exhaled, its fog curling through the streets like a silent prayer, its lights flickering like candles in a storm. The hunter and the scientist were on a collision course, their steps echoing through a city that never slept, their minds racing toward a truth that would test their souls. The monster they sought was not just a man, but a shadow born of faith and science, a creature that thrived in the space between. Their story was unfolding, a tapestry of light and darkness, woven in the quiet of the night, where dreams and truths waited to be found. The fog of London thickened as midnight wove its spell, wrapping the city of 1893 in a veil that softened its jagged edges. The streets lay hushed, their cobblestones glistening like dark mirrors under the flicker of gas lamps, each one reflecting a fragment of the city's hidden heart. The air was alive with subtle notes, the cool damp of river mist, the faint bitterness of coal dust settling in the lungs, the fleeting warmth of a chestnut vendor's fire lingering in a deserted square. The sounds were a delicate chorus, the soft clink of a bottle rolling in an alley, the distant toll of a church bell, the gentle rustle of leaves skittering across the pavement. To touch this world was to feel its pulse, the cold iron of a lamppost, its surface slick with dew, the rough weave of a beggar's shawl brushing past, the fragile weight of a crumpled handbill caught in a gutter. The taste of the air was faint, a blend of soot and sorrow, as if the city exhaled the unfulfilled dreams of those who wandered its shadows. In the dim corridor of the Whitechapel tenement, Van Helsing and Dr. Jekyll stood over the scattered papers, their edges curling like secrets unwilling to be told. The air was heavy with the stench of tobacco and damp plaster, the walls thin, carrying the faint moans of sleepless lives beyond. The papers bore the professor's handwriting, their words a bridge to a past that bound Jekyll to his creation, Edward Hyde, and Van Helsing to a ritual that defied his faith. The hunter's fingers brushed the coarse cloth of the scarred man's coat, its oil stains a clue that pointed to the docks, to a world where the Thames whispered of blood and ambition. Jekyll's eyes, shadowed by guilt, lingered on a single line in the professor's notes, a ritual to transform a man, not into a god, but into a vessel for something older, something that fed on despair. Van Helsing's voice broke the silence, low and steady, a beacon in the gloom. Doctor, Jekyll, these words speak of a purpose beyond Hyde's rage. This is no mere murder. It is a summoning. His hand rested on the silver cross in his pocket, its edges worn smooth by years of faith, its weight a reminder of the darkness he had sworn to hunt. Jekyll nodded, his face pale, his hands trembling as he clutched a paper that named a place. A derelict theatre in Shoreditch, its stage long abandoned, its shadows a haven for secrets. The theatre was a lead, a place where the scarred man and the professor had met, where the ritual might find its culmination. The scientist's heart ached, his mind torn between the formula that had birthed Hyde and the hope that Van Helsing's resolve could cage him. Their steps carried them through the fog-shrouded streets, where the air grew sharper with the tang of coal and the faint salt of the river's breath. The city was a labyrinth, its alleys twisting like veins, its gas lamps flickering like the last breaths of hope. In Shoreditch the theatre loomed, its facade crumbling, its windows dark save for a faint glow from within, like a candle defying the night. The air outside was thick with the scent of rotting wood and stale grease paint, the ground slick with mud that clung to their boots. Inside, the theatre was a cavern of echoes, its air cool and heavy with the musk of dust and forgotten dreams. The stage was bare, its boards creaking underfoot, the curtains tattered, their velvet frayed by time. Van Helsing's eyes scanned the shadows, catching a glint of metal. A knife, its blade dull, its handle etched with the symbol that haunted their trail. Jekyll's breath caught as he stepped onto the stage, the air sharp with the scent of mould and old wax, the mirrors lining the wings reflecting fragments of a face he feared. He saw Hyde in those shadows, his laughter a low growl that lingered in the theatre's silence. The scientist's fingers brushed a prop table, its surface littered with papers and a vial, its liquid green, its glow a mirror to his own creation. The papers spoke of a ritual, its words a litany of blood and transformation, its purpose to awaken a power within Hyde, to make him more than a man, more than a monster. Jekyll's voice was a whisper, heavy with guilt. Van Helsing, I created him. This ritual, it's trying to make him unstoppable. Picture yourself standing on that stage, the air thick with the scent of decay. The vials glow, casting shadows that dance like ghosts. What might it feel like to hold those papers? Their words a confession of a truth you cannot escape. Or imagine walking those fog-bound streets, the gas lamps flicker a fragile guide, the city's pulse a reminder of its hidden heart. How would you bear the weight of a monster born of your own hands, hunted by a faith not your own? The hunter and the scientist stood together, their purposes entwined, their rivalry dissolved in the face of a shared enemy. Van Helsing's path led deeper into the theatre, to a basement where the air was cold and damp, the scent of earth and iron heavy in the gloom. The walls were lined with crates, their contents hidden, their surfaces marked with the same symbol that bound the attacks to the ritual. He found a ledger, its pages filled with names, not victims, but participants, men and women drawn to the professor's promise of power, their hands stained with oil and blood. The scarred man was among them, a pawn in a game that stretched beyond the city, his loyalty bought by a promise of transformation. Van Helsing's heart quickened, his faith a fire that burned through the shadows, his mind tracing the ritual to its source. A circle drawn in chalk, its lines glowing faintly, its centre marked with a vial of green liquid. Jekyll followed, his steps hesitant. his eyes fixed on the circle, its glow a mockery of his science. The air was sharp now, the scent of chemicals mingling with the earth, the mirrors in the basement reflecting a face he no longer recognised. He saw the professor's hand in every detail, the ledger, the vial, the symbol, a mentor who had led him to this abyss, his teachings a chain that bound him to hide. The scientist knelt by the circle, his fingers trembling as he touched the chalk, its texture gritty, its purpose a wound in his soul. He whispered, not a prayer, but a confession. I wanted to free the soul, Van Helsing, but I created Hyde. This ritual, it's my fault. The theatre's silence was a stark contrast to the city's restless hum, its shadows holding the weight of truths unspoken. Van Helsing and Jekyll stood in the basement, their eyes meeting across the glowing circle, their purposes a mirror to the city's own duality. The hunter spoke, his voice steady, his words a vow. We will find him, Doctor. Jekyll. We will end this ritual, not with science or faith alone, but together. Jekyll nodded, his heart heavy, his mind racing. The ledger named a place, a dockside warehouse, its air thick with the stench of tar and decay, its shadows a haven for the scarred man and his master. The ritual was close, its power a threat that loomed like the fog outside. Their steps carried them back to the streets, where the air was cool with the scent of river mist and the faint warmth of a baker's oven kindling for dawn. The city watched, its fog curling like a lover's embrace, its lights flickering like stars in a clouded sky. Van Helsing's faith was a beacon, guiding him through the darkness. Jekyll's guilt was a chain, binding him to a truth he could not escape. They moved toward the warehouse, their steps a vow to find Hyde, to unravel the ritual that bound him to the city's heart. The scarred man was a shadow, his oil-stained hands a clue to the professor's will, his loyalty a thread in a tapestry of blood and ambition. What might it be like to stand in that basement, the air heavy with the scent of earth and sin, the circle's glow a silent accusation? Or picture yourself walking those streets, the fog's chill a reminder of truths hidden in the dark. How would your heart carry the weight of a ritual that blurred the line between man and monster? The hunter and the scientist pressed on, their steps echoing through a city that never slept, their minds racing toward a truth that would test their resolve. The night deepened, its shadows stretching like fingers across the city's heart. Van Helsing and Jekyll moved through the fog, their purpose a flame that burned through the gloom, their rivalry a memory dissolved in the face of a shared enemy. The warehouse loomed ahead, its silhouette a wound in the night, its air thick with the promise of answers. The truth was close, a shadow waiting in the mist, a monster born of science and driven by a darkness older than the city itself. Their story was unfolding, a tapestry of faith and fear, woven in the quiet of the night, where dreams and truths lingered, waiting to be claimed. London's night grew heavier, its shadows pooling like ink in the hollows of 1893, where the city's heart beat slowly and secretively. The fog drifted low, a silent tide that softened the edges of cobblestone streets, their surfaces slick with the memory of rain. The air carried a restless edge, the sharp tang of river mud mingling with the faint warmth of coal fires, the fleeting sweetness of a street vendor's spilled molasses clinging to the breeze. The sounds were a whispered lullaby, the distant creak of a ship's rigging, the soft clatter of a shutter caught in the wind, the muted hum of voices from a dockside tavern. To touch this world was to feel its contradictions, the cold bite of a rusted railing, the smooth chill of a glass bottle discarded in an alley, the fragile weight of a torn handbill fluttering like a ghost. The taste of the air was subtle, a blend of salt and ash, carrying the ache of lives lived on the edge of the Thames, each breath a thread in the city's restless tapestry. Van Helsing and Dr. Jekyll moved through this shrouded city, their steps a quiet vow to confront the shadow that bound them to the warehouse. The dockside loomed ahead, its air thick with the stench of tar and rotting fish, the ground slick with oil that gleamed under the gas lamps like a dark promise. The warehouse was a monolith, its walls weathered by the river's breath, its windows dark save for a faint flicker within, like a heartbeat in the gloom. Van Helsing's hand rested on the silver cross in his pocket, its edges a comfort against the dread that clung to the air. His eyes, sharp with faith, scanned the shadows, catching the glint of a knife left on a crate, its handle etched with the symbol that haunted their trail, a mark of blood and transformation, a ritual that sought to make Hyde more than a man. Dr. Jekyll followed, his coat heavy with the damp, his face pale under the lamplight. The air was sharp with the scent of decay, stirring memories of his laboratory, where the green vial's glow had birthed a monster. His hands trembled as he clutched the professor's ledger, its pages a confession of experiments that blurred the line between science and the occult. He saw Hyde in every shadow, his laughter a low growl that echoed in the warehouse's silence. The scientist's mind raced, tracing the ritual's purpose, not to kill, but to awaken a power within Hyde, a force that fed on the city's despair. His voice was a whisper, heavy with guilt. Van Helsing, this place is a crucible. My formula gave Hyde life, but this ritual seeks to give him eternity. Imagine standing at the warehouse door, the air thick with the stench of the river, the knife's cold metal, a weight in your hand. What might it feel like to step into that darkness, knowing the truth lies in the shadows? Or picture yourself beside Jekyll, the ledger's pages a mirror to your own sins, the ritual's glow a silent accusation. How would your heart bear the weight of a monster born of your own creation, hunted by a faith you cannot claim? The hunter and the scientist stood together, their purposes entwined, their rivalry a distant memory in the face of a shared enemy. Inside the warehouse, the air was cold and heavy, the scent of damp wood and rusted iron mingling with the faint tang of chemicals. The floor creaked underfoot, its boards slick with oil, the shadows deep and unyielding. Van Helsing moved with purpose, his eyes catching a circle drawn in chalk, its lines glowing faintly, its centre marked with a vial of green liquid, its hue a twin to Jekyll's formula. The circle was a ritual's heart, its symbol etched into the wood, its purpose a summons to a power older than the city. He knelt, his fingers tracing the chalk, its texture gritty, its lines a map to a truth that tested his faith. The ledger spoke of a woman, her name tied to the photograph from the tenement, her role a priestess in a cult that sought to transform Hyde into a vessel for something unholy. Jekyll's breath caught as he saw the circle, its glow a mockery of his science, its purpose a wound in his soul. The air was sharp now, the scent of chemicals a reminder of his laboratory, where mirrors reflected a face he no longer trusted. He recognized the woman's name, a figure from the professor's lectures, a shadow who had spoken of power beyond the mortal veil. Her presence tied the attacks to the ritual, her hands stained with the same oil that marked the scarred man. Jekyll's fingers brushed the vial, its liquid pulsing like a heartbeat, its glow a mirror to the chaos he'd unleashed. He whispered, not confession but a plea. Van Helsing, I created Hyde, but they're using him to unleash something worse. The warehouse's silence was a tomb, its shadows holding the weight of truths unspoken. Van Helsing and Jekyll moved deeper, their steps cautious, their eyes scanning the crates that lined the walls. They found a hidden room, its air thick with the scent of incense and blood, the walls marked with the symbol that bound their quest. A table stood in the centre, its surface littered with papers, a knife and a photograph. The woman, her face pale, her eyes burning with a rage that chilled the air. The papers spoke of a final ritual, set for the next night in a crypt beneath a church in Wapping, where the river's breath mingled with the dead. The scarred man was there, a pawn whose hands carried the professor's will, his loyalty a thread in a tapestry of blood and ambition. Van Helsing's voice was steady, a beacon in the gloom. Dr. Jekyll, we must find this crypt before the ritual is complete. Hyde is their vessel, but we can stop him. His faith was a fire burning through the shadows, his cross a shield against the darkness that loomed. Jekyll nodded, his heart heavy, his mind racing. The photograph was a key. The woman a priestess whose rituals had twisted his formula into something monstrous. He saw Hyde in his mind's eye, his strength a mockery of science, his rage a mirror to the city's own. The scientist's hands trembled as he clutched the papers, their words a confession of a truth he could not escape. The ritual was his sin, but its end was his redemption. The city stirred outside, its fog curling like a lover's vow, its lights flickering like candles in a storm. The hunter and the scientist stepped back into the night, their steps a vow to find the crypt, to confront the woman and the scarred man, to cage Hyde before the ritual could awaken his full power. The docks were alive with the hum of labour, the creak of ropes, the shouts of men unloading crates, the clatter of barrels rolling across wooden planks. The air was thick with the stench of tar and salt, the ground slick with the river's refuse. Van Helsing's eyes caught a shadow moving in the fog, its steps heavy, its presence a wound in the night. Jekyll's heart quickened, his mind tracing the shadow to Hyde, to the ritual, to a truth that blurred the line between science and the supernatural. What might it be like to stand in that hidden room, the air heavy with incense and fear, the photograph's eyes a silent challenge? Or envision walking those dockside streets, the fog's chill a reminder of truths hidden in the dark? How would your soul carry the weight of a ritual that sought to transform a man into a monster? The hunter and the scientist pressed on, their steps echoing through a city that never slept, their minds racing toward a truth that would test their resolve. The night stretched thin, its shadows fading as the first whispers of dawn touched the horizon. Van Helsing and Jekyll moved toward Wapping, their purpose a flame that burned through the fog, their rivalry dissolved in the face of a shared enemy. The crypt lay ahead, its silence a promise of answers, its darkness a mirror to the city's heart. The truth was close, a shadow waiting in the mist, a monster born of science and driven by a ritual older than the city itself. Their story was unfolding, a tapestry of faith and fear, woven in the quiet of the night, where dreams and truths lingered, waiting to be claimed. The dawn hesitated on the edge of London's horizon, its pale light struggling against the fog that cloaked the city in 1893. The streets of Wapping were a world of whispers, their cobblestones slick with river mist, each one holding the echo of footsteps long faded. The air was sharp with the scent of salt and decay, laced with the faint warmth of tar fires burning low, their smoke curling like ghosts into the sky. The sounds were a muted symphony, the creak of a ship's hull rocking against the dock, the soft clink of chains swaying in the breeze, the distant call of a watchman fading into the gloom. To touch this world was to feel its weight, the cold, damp wood of a pier's railing, the rough grain of a sack abandoned by the river, the fragile edge of a prayer book left in a doorway, its pages softened by the mist. The taste of the air was bitter, a blend of brine and ash, carrying the quiet despair of lives tethered to the Thames, each breath a vow to endure. Van Helsing and Dr. Jekyll moved through this shrouded dawn, their steps a silent pact to confront the shadow that waited in the crypt. The church in Wapping loomed ahead, its spire a dark silhouette against the paling sky, its walls weathered by the river's breath. The air outside was heavy with the scent of wet stone and old earth, the ground soft underfoot, yielding to their boots like a confession. Van Helsing's hand rested on the silver cross in his pocket, its edges worn smooth, its weight a shield against the darkness that clung to the crypt's promise. His eyes, sharp with faith, caught a flicker of movement in the fog, a shadow, swift and heavy, its presence a wound in the morning's quiet. Dr. Jekyll followed, his coat damp with mist, his face pale, his heart heavy with the knowledge that Hyde was near. his laughter a low growl that haunted the scientist's dreams. Inside the church the air was cool and still, thick with the scent of candle wax and ancient dust, the stained glass windows casting fractured light across the pews. The crypt's entrance was hidden behind the altar, its stone steps descending into a darkness that seemed to breathe. Van Helsing led the way, his steps deliberate, his lantern casting a faint glow that danced across the walls, revealing the symbol etched into the stone, a mark of blood and transformation, a ritual that sought to awaken Hyde's full power. Jekyll's breath caught as he followed, the air sharp with the tang of earth and iron, the mirrors in his mind reflecting a face he feared. He saw Hyde in every shadow, his strength a mockery of science, his rage a mirror to the city's own. Imagine standing at the crypt's entrance, the air heavy with the scent of earth and secrets, the stone cold under your touch. What might it feel like to descend into that darkness, knowing a monster waits below? Or picture yourself beside Jekyll, the lantern's light a fragile guide, the symbol's lines a silent accusation. How would your soul bear the weight of a truth that binds faith to fear, science to shadow? The hunter and the scientist descended, their purposes entwined, their rivalry dissolved in the face of a shared enemy. The crypt was a labyrinth, its air cold and damp, the scent of mould and blood mingling with the faint hum of a distant chant. The walls were lined with ancient tombs, their surfaces worn, their inscriptions faded by time. Van Helsing's lantern caught a circle drawn in chalk, its lines glowing faintly, its centre marked with a vial of green liquid, its hue a twin to Jekyll's formula. The chant grew louder, a low rhythmic drone that seemed to pulse with the city's heart. The scarred man stood within the circle, his coat stained with oil, his hands trembling as he held a knife, its blade etched with the symbol. Beside him was the woman from the photograph, her face pale, her eyes burning with a fervour that chilled the air. She was the priestess, her voice leading the chant, her hands raised in a ritual that sought to transform Hyde into a vessel for something unholy. Jekyll's voice broke the silence, a whisper heavy with guilt. Van Helsing, I made him. She's using my formula to make him a god. His eyes were fixed on the vial, its glow a mockery of his science, its purpose a wound in his soul. The woman turned, her gaze sharp, her voice a hiss. Jekyll, you gave him life. We'll make him our god. Van Helsing stepped forward, his cross raised, its silver gleaming in the lantern's light. This ritual ends tonight, he said, his voice steady, his faith a fire that burned through the shadows. The scarred man lunged, his knife flashing, but Van Helsing was faster, his movements honed by years of hunting darkness. The blade clattered to the stone, the scarred man falling, his hands stained with oil and blood. The woman laughed, a sound that echoed like Hyde's, her eyes burning with a rage that matched the monster's own. She clutched the vial, its liquid pulsing, its glow casting shadows that danced like spectres. Hyde is here, she whispered, her voice a blade. The air grew heavy, the chant rising, and from the shadows emerged a figure, Edward Hyde, his eyes burning like embers, his strength unnatural, his laughter a sound that lingered like a curse. Jekyll's heart stopped, his hands trembling as he faced his creation, a monster born of science, now a vessel for a ritual that fed on the city's despair. Van Helsing's cross gleamed, his voice a prayer that cut through the chant, his faith a shield against the darkness that loomed. The crypt's silence shattered, the air thick with the scent of blood and incense, the chant a pulse that shook the stone. Hyde moved like a shadow, his strength a mockery of humanity, his eyes fixed on Jekyll with a hunger that chilled the soul. Van Helsing stood firm, his cross a beacon, his voice a vow. You will not have him, nor this city. The woman laughed again, her hands raising the vial, its liquid a promise of power beyond the mortal veil. Jekyll lunged, Not for Hyde, but for the vial, his hand steady for the first time, his science a weapon against the ritual's heart. The vial shattered, its liquid spilling across the stone, its glow fading like a dying star. What might it be like to face that monster, the air heavy with the scent of blood and fear, the cross's light a fragile hope? Or envision standing beside Jekyll, the vial's shards a mirror to your own sins, the ritual's chant a weight in your chest? How would your heart carry the burden of a truth that binds creator to creation, hunter to hunted? The crypt trembled, its shadows stretching like fingers across the stone, the ritual's power faltering but not yet broken. The woman screamed, her voice a wail that echoed through the crypt, her hands clawing at the air as the chant dissolved. Hyde roared, his strength surging, his eyes burning with a rage that was both human and monstrous. Van Helsing and Jekyll stood together, their purposes a flame that burned through the gloom, their rivalry a memory dissolved in the face of a shared enemy. The scarred man lay still, his role ended, his hands stained with the ritual's failure. The woman fled into the shadows, her laughter a fading echo, her purpose thwarted but not destroyed. Hyde remained, a shadow born of science, driven by a darkness older than the city itself. The dawn's light crept through the church's windows, its glow a faint promise of hope. In a world of shadows linger like unhealed scars. The streets of Wapping stirred faintly, their cobblestones slick with the river's breath, each one a silent witness to the night's turmoil. The air held a restless chill, woven with the sharp tang of salt and the faint musk of damp earth, softened by the fleeting warmth of a baker's oven kindling in a nearby alley. The sounds were a delicate hum, the gentle lap of the Thames against its banks, the soft creak of a dockworker's cart, the distant toll of a buoy swaying in the current. To touch this world was to feel its fragility, the cold, smooth edge of a stone wall, the rough weave of a rope coiled by the river, the fragile weight of a tattered handbill caught in the mud. The taste of the air was subtle, a blend of brine and soot, carrying the quiet ache of lives tethered to the city's edge, each breath a whisper of endurance. Van Helsing and Dr. Jekyll emerged from the church, their steps heavy with the weight of the crypt's truths, their hearts burdened by the shadow that still haunted the city. The fog curled around them, its damp kiss a reminder of the ritual's failure, its chill a mirror to the fear that lingered in their souls. Van Helsing's hand rested on the silver cross in his pocket, its edges worn by faith, its weight a tether to his resolve. His eyes, sharp with purpose, scanned the streets, catching the faint trace of oil on the cobblestones, a clue left by the priestess's flight, her presence a thread in the tapestry of blood and ambition. Dr. Jekyll followed, his coat heavy with mist, his face pale with the knowledge that Edward Hyde remained free, his laughter a wound that echoed in the scientist's dreams. The city's pulse quickened as they moved toward the heart of Whitechapel, where the air grew thick with the stench of refuse and the faint sweetness of spilled ale, the ground slick with the city's refuse. The ritual had been broken, its vial shattered, its chant silenced. But Hyde's shadow loomed larger, his strength a mockery of the science that birthed him, his rage a mirror to the city's despair. Van Helsing's mind turned over the clues, the oil, the symbol, the priestess's flight, tracing a path to a tenement where the scarred man had once lingered, his hands stained with the ritual's failure. The hunter's faith was a fire, burning through the fog, guiding him toward a truth that tested his soul. Jekyll's heart ached, his science a chain that bound him to Hyde, his guilt a weight that grew heavier with each step. The tenement was a warren of despair, its air heavy with the scent of boiled cabbage and damp plaster, the walls thin, carrying the whispers of lives lived in the margins. The stairs creaked underfoot, their wood worn by countless steps, each one a story of struggle and survival. Van Helsing moved with purpose, his lantern casting a faint glow across the corridor, revealing a door marked with the symbol that haunted their quest. Inside, the room was a crypt of secrets, its air thick with the musk of tobacco and the faint tang of chemicals, the floor littered with papers and a broken vial, its green shards gleaming like fragments of a lost dream. The papers spoke of the priestess, her name a shadow from the professor's past, her role a bridge between the ritual and Hyde's transformation. Jekyll's fingers brushed the shards, their edges sharp, their glow a mirror to his own creation. The air was cool now, the scent of chemicals a reminder of his laboratory, where mirrors reflected a face he no longer trusted. His mind raced, tracing the priestess's path to a meeting with Hyde, her rituals a twisted echo of his formula, her ambition a wound that bled into the city's heart. The scientist's soul was a battlefield, his science clashing with the supernatural, his guilt a chain that bound him to a monster he could not cage. The papers named a place, a derelict mill in Stepney, its wheels silent, its shadows a haven for the priestess and her pawn, where Hyde's power might yet be unleashed. Imagine standing in that tenement room, the air thick with the scent of decay, the vial's shards a silent accusation beneath your touch. What might it feel like to trace those papers, their words a confession of a truth you cannot escape? Or picture yourself walking those fog-bound streets, the lantern's light a fragile guide, the city's pulse a reminder of its hidden heart. How would your heart bear the weight of a monster born of your own hands, hunted by a faith you cannot claim? The hunter and the scientist pressed on, their steps a vow to find Hyde, to unravel the priestess's plan before it could awaken his full power. The mill in Stepney loomed like a forgotten titan, its walls blackened by soot, its air heavy with the scent of rust and damp straw. The ground was soft underfoot, littered with broken machinery, its edges sharp with the city's neglect. Van Helsing's lantern caught a trail of oil, its sheen a thread leading deeper into the mill, where the air grew colder, the shadows deeper, the scent of incense lingering like a G-egg. The hunter's faith was a beacon guiding him through the gloom, his cross a shield against the darkness that waited within. Jekyll followed, his heart heavy, his eyes fixed on the trail, his mind racing with the memory of Hyde's laughter, its sound a wound that would not heal. The mill's heart was a cavern of silence, its air thick with the musk of decay and the faint hum of a distant chant. A circle glowed faintly in the dust, its lines drawn in chalk, its centre marked with a new vial, its liquid green, its glow a twin to Jekyll's formula. The priestess was gone, her presence a shadow that lingered in the air, her rituals a promise of power yet to come. The papers found in the mill spoke of a final act, a ritual to be completed under a blood moon, in a graveyard where the city's dead whispered of secrets long buried. Hyde was close, his strength a mockery of science, his rage a mirror to the city's own, his purpose tied to the priestess's will. Van Helsing's hand tightened on the cross, its silver a cold comfort, its weight a reminder of the faith that had carried him through countless hunts. His mind turned over the clues, tracing the priestess's path to the graveyard, her rituals a thread in a tapestry of blood and ambition. Jekyll's fingers brushed the vial, its glow a mockery of his science, its purpose a wound in his soul. The scientist saw Hyde in every shadow, his creation a monster that had grown beyond his control, its power a bridge to a darkness older than the city itself. Their steps carried them out of the mill, back into the fog-shrouded streets, where the air was sharp with the scent of river mud and the faint warmth of a dawn that refused to break. What might it be like to stand in that mill, the air heavy with the scent of rust and incense, the vial's glow a silent challenge? Or envision walking those streets, the fog's chill a reminder of truths hidden in the dark? How would your soul carry the weight of a ritual that seeks to transform a man into a monster? The hunter and the scientist moved forward, their purpose a flame that burned through the gloom. their rivalry dissolved in the face of a shared enemy. The city's dawn was a fragile promise, its light struggling against the fog that cloaked its secrets. Van Helsing and Jekyll moved toward the graveyard, their steps a vow to find Hyde, to confront the priestess before the blood moon could awaken his power. The truth was close, a shadow waiting in the mist, a monster born of science and driven by a ritual older than the city itself. Their story was unfolding, a tapestry of faith and fear, woven in the quiet of the dawn where dreams and truths lingered, waiting to be claimed. The blood moon hung low over London, its crimson glow bleeding into the fog that cloaked the city in 1893, casting an eerie light across streets that seemed to hold their breath. The graveyard in Stepney was a silent world, its headstones leaning like weary sentinels, their surfaces slick with dew and time. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and wilting flowers, laced with the faint bitterness of coal smoke drifting from distant chimneys. The sounds were a hushed requiem, the soft rustle of leaves skittering across graves, the distant hoot of an owl perched in a gnarled yew, the gentle creak of a rusted gate swaying in the breeze. To touch this world was to feel its solemn weight, the cold, moss-covered stone of a tomb, the fragile petals of a forgotten wreath, the gritty texture of soil clinging to the fingers. The taste of the air was faint, a blend of dust and decay, carrying the quiet sorrow of lives long ended, each breath a whisper of the city's buried secrets. Van Helsing and Dr. Jekyll moved through this shadowed graveyard, their steps cautious, their hearts burdened by the ritual's looming threat. The fog curled around them, its chill a silent vow, its damp touch a reminder of the darkness that waited beneath the blood moon's gaze. Van Helsing's hand rested on the silver cross in his pocket, its edges a steady anchor, its weight a shield against the fear that stirred in his soul. His eyes, sharp with faith, scanned the graves, catching the faint glow of a chalk circle hidden among the tombstones, its lines pulsing with an unnatural light. Dr. Jekyll followed, his coat heavy with the night's damp, his face pale with the knowledge that Edward Hyde was near, his presence a wound that bled into the scientist's dreams. The graveyard was a crucible, its silence a mirror to the city's heart, its shadows a haven for the ritual that sought to unleash Hyde's full power. The circle glowed faintly, its chalk lines etched into the earth, its centre marked with a vial of green liquid, its hue a twin to Jekyll's formula, its glow a mockery of his science. The air was thick with the scent of incense and blood, the faint hum of a chant lingering like a ghost, though the priestess was nowhere to be seen. Van Helsing knelt by the circle, his fingers tracing the chalk, its texture gritty, its lines a map to a truth that tested his faith. The ritual was close to completion, its power a pulse that seemed to draw the blood moon's light, its purpose to transform Hyde into a vessel for a darkness older than the city itself. His mind turned over the clues, the oil, the symbol, the priestess's flight, tracing a path to a crypt at the graveyard's edge, its door ajar, its darkness a promise of answers. Jekyll's heart quickened as he approached the crypt, the air sharp with the tang of earth and iron, the mirrors in his mind reflecting a face he feared. He saw Hyde in every shadow, his strength a mockery of science, his rage a mirror to the city's despair. The scientist's fingers brushed the vial, its glow a wound in his soul, its liquid a reminder of the formula that had birthed a monster. The papers from the mill had spoken of this moment, a final ritual under the blood moon, where Hyde would become more than a man, more than a monster. Jekyll's soul was a battlefield, his science clashing with the supernatural, his guilt a chain that bound him to a truth he could not escape. The crypt was a threshold, its darkness a mirror to the chaos within him, its silence a vow to confront the shadow he had created. Picture yourself standing among those graves, the air heavy with the scent of earth and sorrow, the circle's glow a silent challenge beneath your touch. What might it feel like to face that crypt, knowing a monster waits within? Or envision lingering beside Jekyll, The vials light a fragile accusation. The blood moon's crimson glow a weight in your chest. How would your heart bear the burden of a ritual that seeks to transform a man into a shadow? The hunter and the scientist stood together, their purposes entwined, their rivalry dissolved in the face of a shared enemy. The crypt's entrance was a moor of darkness, its air cold and damp, the scent of mould and blood mingling with the faint musk of incense. The stone steps descended into a silence that seemed to breathe, their surfaces slick with the graveyard's tears. Van Helsing's lantern cast a faint glow, revealing walls etched with the symbol that haunted their quest, its lines a warning of a power beyond the mortal veil. The hunter's faith was a fire burning through the shadows, guiding him deeper into the crypt, where the air grew heavier, the scent of blood stronger, the hum of a chant, a pulse that shook the stone. Jekyll followed, his steps hesitant, his eyes fixed on the glow, his mind racing with the memory of Hyde's laughter, its sound a wound that would not heal. The crypt's heart was a chamber of shadows, its air thick with the scent of decay, and the faint glow of candles arranged in a circle. The priestess stood within, her face pale, her eyes burning with a fervour that chilled the air, her hands clutching a new vial, its liquid pulsing like a heartbeat. Hyde was there, his presence a wound in the darkness, his strength a mockery of humanity, his eyes gleaming like embers under the blood moon's light. The ritual was in motion, its chant a low drone that seemed to draw the city's despair, its power a bridge to a darkness older than the city itself. Van Helsing's hand tightened on the cross, its silver a cold comfort, its weight a reminder of the faith that had carried him through countless hunts. His mind traced the ritual's purpose, its symbols a map to a truth that tested his resolve. Jekyll's fingers trembled as he faced Hyde, the air sharp with the scent of blood and incense, the mirrors in his mind reflecting a creator and his creation. The scientist saw the priestess's ritual as a twisted echo of his formula, her ambition a mirror to his own hubris, her purpose a wound that bled into the city's heart. His science was a chain binding him to Hyde, but his resolve was a spark kindled by Van Helsing's faith, a vow to end the ritual before it could awaken Hyde's full power. The crypt trembled, its shadows stretching like fingers across the stone, the chant a pulse that shook the air. The hunter and the scientist stood together, their purposes a flame that burned through the gloom, their rivalry a memory dissolved in the face of a shared enemy. The priestess's hands moved, her ritual nearing its climax, the vial's glow casting shadows that danced like spectres. Hyde's presence grew stronger, his rage a mirror to the city's own, his power a threat that loomed like the blood moon above. Van Helsing's faith was a beacon, guiding him toward the circle, his cross a shield against the darkness that waited within. Jekyll's heart quickened, his science a weapon now, his resolve a vow to undo the chaos he had unleashed. The crypt was a crucible, its silence a mirror to the city's heart, its shadows a haven for a truth that would test their souls. Imagine standing in that crypt, the air thick with the scent of blood and fear, the vial's glow a silent accusation. What might it be like to face that monster, knowing the ritual's power is a breath away? Or picture yourself beside Jekyll, the chant's pulse, a weight in your chest, the blood moon's light a reminder of truths hidden in the dark. How would your soul carry the burden of a shadow born of science hunted by faith? The hunter and the scientist pressed on, their steps a vow to end the ritual, their purpose a flame that burned through the night. The blood moon's light faded, its crimson glow giving way to the first whispers of dawn, a fragile promise in a city of shadows. Van Helsing and Jekyll stood in the crypt, their resolve a fire that burned through the gloom, their rivalry dissolved in the face of a shared enemy. The truth was close, a shadow waiting in the mist, a monster born of science and driven by a ritual older than the city itself. Their story was unfolding, a tapestry of faith and fear, woven in the quiet of the dawn where dreams and truths lingered, waiting to be claimed. The blood moon's crimson light waned over London, its glow retreating like a tide, leaving the city of 1893 cloaked in a fog that seemed to pulse with secrets. The graveyard in Stepney lay still, its headstones silent sentinels under a sky bruised by dawn's approach, their surfaces slick with the night's tears. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and fading incense, woven with the faint bitterness of coal smoke and the fleeting warmth of a distant fire kindling in a tenement's hearth. The sounds were a delicate requiem, the soft rustle of leaves caught in the wind, the distant creak of a cartwheel rolling through the mist, the gentle murmur of the Thames cradling the city's edge. To touch this world was to feel its solemn weight, the cold, mossy texture of a gravestone, the fragile petals of a wilted rose left in offering, the gritty cling of soil beneath the nails. The taste of the air was subtle, a blend of dust and river mist, carrying the quiet sorrow of lives buried beneath the city's heart, each breath a whisper of endurance against the darkness. Van Helsing and Dr. Jekyll stood in the crypt, their shadows merging with the stone, their resolve a fragile flame against the ritual's looming power. The air was heavy with the scent of blood and incense, the faint hum of the priestess's chant, a pulse that shook the walls, its rhythm a mirror to the city's restless soul. Van Helsing's hand tightened on the silver cross, its edges worn by years of faith, its weight a tether to his purpose. His eyes, sharp with resolve, traced the chalk circle's glowing lines, their unnatural light a challenge to his belief, their purpose a summons to a darkness older than the city itself. Dr. Jekyll stood beside him, his coat damp with the crypt's chill, his face pale with the weight of his creation. Edward Hyde's presence was a wound in the air, his strength a mockery of science, his rage a mirror to the city's despair, his eyes gleaming like embers under the fading blood moon. The priestess stood within the circle, her hands steady, her eyes burning with a fervour that seemed to draw the shadows closer. The vial of green liquid pulsed in her grasp, its glow a twin to Jekyll's formula, its light casting spectres that danced across the stone. The ritual was a heartbeat away from completion, its power a bridge to a force that defied both faith and reason. Van Helsing moved forward, his steps deliberate, his lantern casting a faint glow that flickered against the crypt's walls, revealing symbols etched in blood, their lines a map to a truth that tested his soul. His faith was a fire burning through the gloom, guiding him toward the circle where the priestess's chant wove a tapestry of blood and ambition, its threads binding Hyde to a power beyond the mortal veil. Jekyll's heart quickened, his fingers trembling as he faced the vial, its glow a mockery of his science, its purpose a wound that bled into his soul. The scientist saw Hyde in the shadows, his creation a monster that had grown beyond his control, its strength a reflection of his own hubris, its rage a mirror to the city's darkness. The priestess's ritual was a twisted echo of his formula, her ambition a shadow of his own, her purpose a chain that bound him to a truth he could not escape. His mind raced, tracing the symbols to the professor's teachings, to a lecture hall where he had first dreamed of freeing the soul, only to unleash a nightmare. The crypt was a crucible, its silence a mirror to the city's heart, its shadows a haven for a truth that blurred the line between man and monster. Imagine standing in that crypt, the air thick with the scent of blood and fear, the circle's glow a silent challenge beneath your touch. What might it feel like to face a monster born of science, its presence a wound in the dark? Or picture yourself beside Jekyll, the vial's light a fragile accusation, the chant's pulse a weight in your chest. How would your soul bear the burden of a ritual that seeks to awaken a darkness older than the city itself? The hunter and the scientist stood together, their purposes entwined, their rivalry a memory dissolved in the face of a shared enemy. The crypt trembled, its stone walls shuddering as the ritual's power surged, the chant of a drone that seemed to draw the blood moon's last light. Hyde moved within the shadows, his strength a mockery of humanity, his eyes burning with a rage that chilled the air. Van Helsing's faith was a beacon, guiding him closer to the circle, his cross a shield against the darkness that loomed. His mind turned over the clues, the oil, the symbols, the priestess's ambition, tracing a path to a truth that tested his resolve. The ritual was not just a transformation, but a summoning, a call to a force that fed on the city's despair, its power a key to unleashing Hyde's full potential. The hunter's hand steadied, his faith a fire that burned through the shadows, his purpose a vow to end the ritual before it could consume the city. Jekyll's steps were hesitant, his eyes fixed on Hyde, his heart heavy with the knowledge that his creation was the ritual's heart. The air was sharp with the scent of blood and incense, the mirrors in his mind reflecting a face he no longer trusted. His science was a chain, binding him to Hyde, but his resolve was a spark, kindled by Van Helsing's faith, a vow to undo the chaos he had unleashed. The scientist's fingers brushed the edge of the circle, its chalk gritty under his touch, its glow a reminder of the formula that had birthed a monster. He saw the priestess's ambition as a mirror to his own, her rituals a twisted reflection of his experiments, her purpose a wound that bled into the city's heart. The crypt was a battlefield, its silence a testament to the clash of faith and science, its shadows a haven for a truth that would test their souls. The priestess's hands moved with purpose, her chant rising, its rhythm a pulse that shook the air. The vial's glow intensified, its liquid pulsing like a heartbeat, its light casting shadows that danced like spectres across the stone. Hyde's presence grew stronger, his rage a mirror to the city's own, his power a threat that loomed like the blood moon fading light. Van Helsing moved closer, his lantern casting a faint glow, his cross a beacon in the gloom. The hunter's faith was a fire, burning through the shadows, guiding him toward the priestess, whose eyes burned with a fervour that defied reason. Jekyll followed, his heart quickening, his science a weapon now, his resolve a vow to end the ritual before it could awaken Hyde's full power. The crypt's air grew heavier, the scent of blood and incense mingling with the faint musk of decay, the chant a pulse that seemed to draw the city's despair. The symbols on the walls glowed faintly, their lines a map to a truth that blurred the line between man and monster. Van Helsing's hand tightened on the cross, its silver a cold comfort, its weight a reminder of the faith that had carried him through countless hunts. His mind traced the ritual's purpose, its symbols a warning of a power beyond the mortal veil, its power a key to unleashing Hyde's potential. Jekyll's fingers trembled as he faced the circle, its glow a mockery of his science, its purpose a wound in his soul. The scientist saw Hyde as a shadow born of his own hubris, a monster that had degree. The ritual reached its peak, the chant a crescendo that shook the stone, the vial's glow a beacon in the dark. Hyde's presence was a wound in the air, his strength a mockery of humanity, his eyes gleaming with a rage that chilled the soul. Van Helsing moved with purpose, his faith a fire that burned through the gloom, his cross a shield against the darkness that loomed. Jekyll's resolve hardened, his science a weapon now, his guilt a spark that kindled his purpose. The scientist stepped into the circle, his hand steady for the first time, his heart a battlefield where faith and science clashed. The priestess's chant faltered, her eyes widening as the ritual's power wavered, the vial's glow flickering like a dying star. The crypt trembled, its shadows stretching like fingers across the stone, the chant dissolving into silence. Hyde roared, his strength surging, his rage a mirror to the city's own, his power a threat that loomed like the blood moon fading light. Own beyond his control, its rage a mirror to the city's darkness. Van Helsing and Jekyll stood together, their purposes a flame that burned through the gloom, their rivalry a memory dissolved in the face of a shared enemy. The priestess's hands fell, the vial slipping from her grasp, its liquid spilling across the stone, its glow fading like a dream. The ritual was broken, its power shattered, but Hyde remained, a shadow born of science, driven by a darkness older than the city itself. Imagine standing in that crypt, the air thick with the scent of blood and fear, darkness beyond reason. The hunter and the scientist pressed on, their steps a vow to end the threat, their purpose a flame that burned through the night. The dawn's first light crept through the crypt's entrance, its glow a fragile promise in a city of shadows. Van Helsing and Jekyll emerged, their resolve a fire that burned through the gloom, their hearts burdened by the knowledge that Hyde was still free. The priestess was gone, her flight a shadow in the fog, her ambition a wound that lingered in the city's heart. The truth was close, a shadow waiting in the mist, a monster born of science and driven by a darkness older than the city itself. Their story was unfolding, a tapestry of faith and fear woven in the quiet of the dawn where dreams and truths lingered waiting to be claimed. The dawn's pale light crept over London, its glow a fragile vow against the fog that cloaked the city in 1893, softening the scars of a night steeped in shadows. The streets of Whitechapel stirred faintly, their cobblestones gleaming like dark mirrors, each one holding the echo of footsteps that had chased the darkness. The air was sharp with the scent of river mud and fading coal smoke, laced with the fleeting warmth of a street vendor's fire kindling in a quiet square. The sounds were a gentle requiem, the soft lap of the Thames against its banks, the distant clatter of a milk cart's wheels, the faint murmur of prayers from a nearby chapel. To touch this world was to feel its enduring weight, the cold, smooth edge of a lamppost, the rough grain of a wooden bench damp with dew, the fragile texture of a torn handbill fluttering in an alley. The taste of the air was subtle, a blend of soot and salt, carrying the quiet ache of lives woven into the city's heart, each breath a testament to its restless soul. Van Helsing and Dr. Jekyll moved through this waking city, their steps heavy with the burden of the crypt's truths, their resolve a flame that burned through the fog. The ritual was broken, its vial shattered, its chant silenced, but Edward Hyde remained a shadow in the mist, his presence a wound that bled into the city's veins. Van Helsing's hand rested on the silver cross in his pocket, its edges worn by faith, its weight a tether to his purpose. His eyes, sharp with resolve, scanned the streets, catching the faint trace of oil on the cobblestones, a clue left by the priestess's flight, her ambition a thread that still bound Hyde to the city's despair. Dr. Jekyll followed, his coat heavy with the dawn's damp, his face pale with the knowledge that his creation was the heart of this darkness, its rage a mirror to his own guilt. The city's pulse quickened as they traced the priestess's path to a derelict tenement in Limehouse, its walls blackened by soot, its air thick with the stench of refuse and the faint sweetness of spilled wine. The ground was slick with the river's breath, its surface littered with broken glass and the remnants of lives lived in the margins. Van Helsing's lantern cast a faint glow, revealing a door marked with the symbol that haunted their quest, its lines etched in blood, its purpose a warning of a darkness yet to be faced. The tenement was a labyrinth, its corridors dim, its floors creaking underfoot, each step a whisper of secrets buried in the city's bones. Jekyll's heart ached, his science a chain that bound him to Hyde, his guilt a weight that grew heavier with each step, his resolve kindled by the hunter's faith. Inside the tenement, the air was heavy with the scent of tobacco and damp plaster, the walls thin, carrying the faint moans of sleepless lives beyond. The room they sought was a crypt of shadows, its air thick with the musk of decay and the faint tang of chemicals, the floor littered with papers and a broken vial, its green shards gleaming like fragments of a lost dream. The papers spoke of the priestess's final plan, a desperate act to revive the ritual in a hidden chapel by the docks, where the river's breath mingled with the city's despair. Hyde was there, his strength a mockery of science, his rage a mirror to the city's heart, his presence a wound that would not heal. Van Helsing's hand tightened on the cross, its silver a cold comfort, its weight a reminder of the faith that had carried him through countless hunts. Jekyll's fingers brushed the shards, their edges sharp, their glow a mirror to his own creation. The air was cool now, the scent of chemicals a reminder of his laboratory, where mirrors reflected a face he no longer trusted. His mind raced, tracing the priestess's path to the chapel, her rituals a twisted echo of his formula, her ambition a wound that bled into the city's soul. The scientist's soul was a battlefield, his science clashing with the supernatural, his guilt a chain that bound him to a truth he could not escape. The chapel was a threshold, its darkness a mirror to the chaos within him, its silence a vow to confront the shadow he had created. The hunter and the scientist moved together, their steps a silent pact, their purposes entwined in the face of a shared enemy. Imagine standing in that tenement, the air thick with the scent of decay, the vile shards a silent accusation beneath your touch. What might it feel like to trace those papers, their words a confession of a truth you cannot escape? Or picture yourself walking those fog-bound streets, the lantern's light a fragile guide, the city's pulse a reminder of its hidden heart. How would your heart bear the weight of a monster born of your own hands, hunted by a faith you cannot claim? The hunter and the scientist pressed on, their steps a vow to find Hyde, to end the priestess's plan before it could awaken his full power. The chapel by the docks loomed like a forgotten relic, its walls weathered by the river's breath, its windows dark save for a faint glow within, like a candle defying the dawn. The air was sharp with the scent of salt and tar, the ground slick with the city's refuse, its surface littered with broken nets and the remnants of a fisherman's toil. Van Helsing's lantern caught a trail of the oil, its sheen a thread leading into the chapel where the air grew colder, the shadows deeper, the scent of incense lingering like a ghost. The hunter's faith was a beacon, guiding him through the gloom, his cross a shield against the darkness that waited within. Jekyll followed, his heart quickening, his eyes fixed on the trail, his mind racing with the memory of Hyde's laughter, its sound a wound that would not heal. The chapel's heart was a sanctuary of shadows, its air thick with the scent of blood and incense, the faint hum of a chant lingering like a memory. A circle glowed faintly in the dust, its lines drawn in chalk, its centre marked with a new vial, its liquid green, its glow a twin to Jekyll's formula. The priestess was there, her face pale, her eyes burning with a fervour that chilled the air, her hands clutching the vial, its liquid pulsing like a heartbeat. Hyde stood beside her, his presence a wound in the darkness, his strength a mockery of humanity, his eyes gleaming like embers in the gloom. The ritual was reborn, its chant a low drone that seemed to draw the city's despair, its power a bridge to a darkness older than the city itself. Van Helsing moved with purpose, his lantern casting a faint glow, his cross a beacon in the gloom. His faith was a fire, burning through the shadows, guiding him toward Roland J. Transfiguration, the priestess, whose ambition had twisted Jekyll's science into a nightmare. His mind traced the ritual's purpose, its symbols a warning of a power beyond the mortal veil, its power a key to unleashing Hyde's potential. Jekyll's fingers trembled as he faced Hyde, the air sharp with the scent of blood and incense, the mirrors in his mind reflecting a creator and his creation. She's twisting my work, Van Helsing. Her ritual. It's my failure reborn. His science was a chain, binding him to Hyde, but his resolve was a spark kindled by Van Helsing's faith, a vow to end the chaos he had unleashed. The chapel trembled, its shadows stretching like fingers across the stone, the chant a pulse that shook the air. The priestess's hands moved with purpose, the vial's glow intensifying, its liquid pulsing like a heartbeat. Hyde's presence grew stronger, his rage a mirror to the city's own, his power a threat that loomed like the dawn's fragile light. Van Helsing stepped into the circle, his cross raised, its silver gleaming in the lantern's light, its power a shield against the darkness that loomed. Jekyll followed, his heart steady for the first time, his science a weapon now, his resolve a vow to undo the chaos he had created. The priestess's chant faltered, her eyes widening as the ritual's power wavered, the vial's glow flickering like a dying star. The ritual collapsed, the chant dissolving into silence, the vial slipping from the priestess's grasp, its liquid spilling across the stone, its glow fading like a dream. Hyde roared, his strength surging, his rage a mirror to the city's own, but Van Helsing was faster, his faith a fire that burned through the gloom. The hunter's cross pressed against the circle, its power a shield that broke the ritual's heart, its light a beacon that banished the shadows. Jekyll lunged forward, his hands steady, his science a weapon that shattered the vial's remnants, its liquid seeping into the stone, its power extinguished. Hyde's presence wavered, his strength fading, his rage dissolving into the dawn's light, his form collapsing into the shadows from which he came. The priestess fell, her ambition a wound that bled into the city's heart, her body still, her eyes empty of the fervour that had driven her. The chapel's silence was a testament to the ritual's end, its shadows retreating like a tide, its air heavy with the scent of blood and incense. Van Helsing stood over the circle, his cross a cold comfort, his faith a fire that had burned through the darkness. Jekyll knelt beside the shattered vial, his heart heavy, his science a chain that had been broken, his guilt a weight that lingered but no longer bound him. The city exhaled, its fog curling like a silent prayer, its dawn a promise of redemption in a world of shadows. Imagine standing in that chapel, the air thick with the scent of blood and victory, the vial's shards a silent testament to a truth reclaimed. What might it feel like to face the end of a monster, its presence a wound healed by faith and science? Or picture yourself beside Jekyll, the dawn's light a fragile hope, the city's pulse a reminder of its enduring heart. How would your soul bear the weight of a redemption won through sacrifice? The hunter and the scientist stood together, their purposes fulfilled, their rivalry a memory dissolved in the face of a shared victory. The dawn's light grew stronger, its glow a vow that banished the fog, casting London streets in a soft golden haze. Van Helsing and Jekyll emerged from the chapel, their steps lighter, their hearts unburdened by the shadow that had haunted the city. Hyde was gone, his presence a memory, his power extinguished by the fire of faith and the resolve of science. The priestess's ambition was a wound that would heal, her rituals a shadow that would fade in the city's light. The truth was theirs, a tapestry of faith and fear woven in the quiet of the dawn, its threads a testament to a city that endured, its secrets lingering in the mist, waiting for new stories to be told. That's our tale tonight, listeners. Share your thoughts, your city, your time zone. Are you beneath the lanterns of Kyoto, drifting through fog in Edinburgh, or watching dawn break over Los Angeles? If this story settled softly in your mind, like this episode, and subscribe if you walk well in the shadows. Keep your lanterns lit, rest easy, until next time.